Most backyard apple trees produce barely enough for a single pie. Amish orchards in Lancaster County pull thousands of pounds from the same number of trees every single fall. The gap isn't variety or weather, it's 8 specific habits almost no backyard grower ever follows. The variety selection secret. Most nurseries sell backyard apple trees bred for shelf life and appearance, thin-skinned varieties that look good on a branch but produce light crops. Amish orchards across Pennsylvania and Ohio have grown heirloom varieties, like winesap, golden russet, and limber twig for generations. Dual-purpose trees bred for heavy volume and dense flesh that holds up to pressing, drying, and long storage. A bare root heirloom whip from a heritage nursery runs $15 to $20, the same price as ornamental garden center trees that will never produce half the yield. What if the tree was already limited before you planted it? Let me ask you something. What if your tree's low production had nothing to do with how you care for it, and everything to do with the rootstock it was grafted onto before leaving the nursery? Most backyard trees come on dwarfing rootstock, designed to keep trees small for suburban lots. Amish orchards in Indiana and Ohio have always planted standard rootstock trees that reach full size over 10 to 15 years and produce for a century. A standard tree produces 400 to 800 pounds per season. A dwarf tree caps at 40 to 80, a ceiling built in before you planted it. The pruning window. Most backyard growers prune in fall when leaves drop, assuming dormancy means timing doesn't matter. Amish orchardists across Pennsylvania prune in late February or early March. Still fully dormant, but past the worst cold, and the difference in response is measurable by midsummer. Pruning in fall removes stored carbohydrates the tree needs for winter survival, leaving wounds exposed to freezing before any healing begins. Late dormancy pruning leaves those reserves intact and cuts heal quickly once temperatures rise, directing energy straight into new fruiting wood. Amish orchardists use the central leader system, one dominant trunk with evenly spaced scaffold branches, maximizing sunlight to interior fruit. A tree service charges $150 to $300 per tree annually. Late dormancy pruning costs nothing but timing. The pollination system. A single apple tree, standing alone, produces a fraction of its potential, because apple trees require cross-pollination from a different variety to set a full crop, and most backyard plantings give them no partner within effective range. Amish orchards across Ohio and Indiana have been planted in clusters of 3 or more compatible varieties since the 1800s, bloom times overlapping so bees carry pollen across varieties through the entire flowering window. Historical records from Lancaster County date this cluster system to the mid-1700s, when Pennsylvania Dutch farmers observed that isolated trees always underproduced. Adding one compatible pollinator tree within 50 feet can double fruit set with no other change to management. The ground cover beneath every tree. Now here's what makes the pollination system even more effective than simply planting multiple varieties. What Amish orchardists grow on the ground underneath every single tree across the entire orchard floor. Rather than mowing bare grass or keeping ground cover suppressed, Amish farms across Wisconsin and Pennsylvania maintain a permanent planting of clover, phacelia, and native wildflowers beneath their trees, providing continuous bloom from early spring through late summer that keeps pollinator populations high and active throughout the entire fruit-setting period. A tree surrounded by pollinator habitat gets visited far more frequently during its own bloom window than a tree standing over bare lawn, because the insect population is already established and feeding nearby rather than passing through. A Cornell University pollinator habitat study from 2019 measured fruit set rates 34% higher in orchard blocks with established ground cover compared to mowed grass controls. Commercial pollinator sprays marketed to backyard growers run $20 to $30 per application, while clover seed costs under $4 and reseeds itself every season indefinitely. The June thinning method. In June, when tiny developing apples are still the size of a marble, Amish orchardists do something that looks destructive to anyone who hasn't seen the results. They remove 60 to 70% of the fruit by hand, leaving only the single largest, best-positioned apple from each cluster and spacing remaining fruit every 6 to 8 inches along every branch. Most backyard growers never thin at all, assuming more small fruit is better than fewer large ones, and end up with a tree exhausted by trying to develop hundreds of undersized apples that drop early, taste poor, and are too small to press or store. The tree has a fixed amount of energy to distribute across its entire fruit load, and thinning forces all of that energy into a fraction of the fruit, producing apples large enough to press efficiently, store through winter, and sell at a premium over the golf ball-sized drops that fill most backyard harvests. A University of Pennsylvania horticulture trial from 2018 found that thin trees produced individual fruit averaging 40% heavier than unthin trees of the same variety, with significantly better sugar content and storage life measured at harvest. Let me ask you something most people never consider. Let me ask you something most people never consider. Where exactly are you putting the fertilizer when you feed your apple tree? And why does it end up doing almost nothing? Most backyard growers spread fertilizer in a ring around the base of the trunk, directly under the canopy center, because that's where the tree visually presents itself. But apple tree roots extend outward well beyond the drip line, the outer edge of the canopy, and the feeder roots that actually absorb nutrients are concentrated in the zone from the drip line outward, not anywhere near the trunk. Applying fertilizer at the trunk puts it directly over structural roots that do no feeding and in many cases directly onto the root flare where concentrated nitrogen can cause long-term bark damage. Amish orchardists in Lancaster County have always applied aged compost in a ring starting at the drip line and extending 2 feet outward, following where the feeder roots actually are rather than where the tree looks like it should be fed. The difference in uptake between trunk application and drip line application is dramatic, with Penn State Extension research from 2020 measuring significantly higher foliar nitrogen levels in drip line-fed trees compared to base-fed trees receiving identical compost quantities. Bagged tree fertilizer spikes designed to be driven near the trunk cost $15 to $25 per tree per season and miss the root zone almost entirely. The pest management without chemicals. The single biggest cost in a conventional backyard or commercial apple operation isn't fertilizer or pruning, it's the spray program, designed to protect developing fruit from codling moth larvae and apple maggot fly, the two insects responsible for the brown-tunneled, unusable fruit most homegrowers accept as normal. A full-season chemical spray program for a small backyard orchard runs $150 to $200 in products alone, requires precise timing across multiple applications, and still leaves residue questions for anyone pressing fruit into cider or drying it for winter storage. Amish orchardists across Pennsylvania and Ohio have managed both pests for generations using kaolin clay, a fine white mineral powder, mixed with water and sprayed onto developing fruit in early summer to form a physical barrier the insects cannot penetrate to lay eggs. The coating is completely non-toxic, washes off at harvest with plain water, and leaves no residue in pressed cider or dried apple products. Kaolin clay applications begin in late May when fruit is still pea-sized and continue every 2 to 3 weeks through midsummer, with the clay itself costing under $20 for enough material to cover a full season on multiple trees. A University of Ohio integrated pest management study from 2019 found kaolin clay reduced codling moth damage by over 80% in test orchards compared to unprotected controls, matching the effectiveness of chemical spray programs at a fraction of the cost and with none of the handling restrictions that chemical products require. Let me ask you something. What if the $8,000 has nothing to do with selling apples? Let me ask you something. What if the $8,000 figure has nothing to do with selling fresh apples at a farmer's market, and everything to do with how Amish families have processed one crop into 5 different products for over 200 years? Fresh-eating apples from a well-managed acre sell for modest prices and require a ready local market. But Amish households across Pennsylvania and Ohio have never relied on fresh sales alone, converting the same harvest into pressed cider at $8 to $12 per gallon, dried apple rings and slices at $15 to $20 per pound, apple butter in half-pint jars at $6 to $8 each, raw apple cider vinegar at $10 to $15 per bottle, and whole fresh apples stored through winter in root cellars for sale as late as February when no local fresh fruit is available. Each product layer extracts different value from fruit at different stages of ripeness and condition, meaning windfalls and blemished fruit that would be unsellable fresh get pressed, overripe fruit gets cooked into butter, and only the firmest perfect specimens go into storage. Historical records from Lancaster County Amish farm accounts dating back to the 1800s show apple processing as one of the primary fall household income sources, with families running cider presses communally to move entire harvests through in a single week. The math across all 5 product lines from a single managed acre adds up to $8,000 or more without a single bushel being sold as fresh fruit at market price. The harvest and storage system. The final piece of the system is the one most backyard growers get completely wrong, picking all the apples at once when the first variety ripens, and then scrambling to use everything before it softens. Amish orchardists harvest by variety across a staggered 6-week window that runs from late August through mid-October in most Pennsylvania and Ohio growing regions, picking each variety only at its exact peak ripeness rather than clearing the entire orchard in a single session. Early varieties like yellow transparent ripen in August and go immediately to pressing or drying. Mid-season varieties ripen through September and go into short-term storage and apple butter production. Late-keeping varieties like winesap and golden russet ripen in October and go into root cellar storage, where they hold firm and flavorful through February and sometimes into March without any refrigeration. Root cellar storage for apples requires maintaining temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, with high humidity and good airflow, conditions that naturally occur in a properly built below-ground cellar without electricity. A Cornell University post-harvest storage study from 2019 found late-keeping heirloom varieties stored in proper root cellar conditions retained eating quality for up to 5 months, extending the sale and use window far beyond anything a modern refrigerator can match for the same varieties. The staggered harvest and multi-product processing system means no single week produces more than the household can handle, and nothing from a well-managed acre ever goes to waste on the ground. 8 habits, 1 acre, and a harvest worth $8,000 that starts with variety selection before the tree ever goes in the ground. Heirloom rootstock for lifetime yield, late dormancy pruning for maximum fruiting wood, compatible pollinator varieties planted in clusters, clover ground cover that keeps bees working all season, June thinning that puts all the tree's energy into fewer larger apples, drip line feeding that actually reaches the roots, kale and clay that replaces the entire spray program, and a staggered harvest into 5 separate product lines that multiply the value of the same fruit 10 times over. None of it requires expensive equipment, none of it requires a chemistry degree or a commercial spray license. All of it has been practiced on Amish farms since the 1700s, without changing once, because it never needed to. So, here's the real question. How many pounds did your apple tree produce last fall? Drop a comment below and let us know. And while you're there, pick your team. Team Heirloom Orchard if you're replanting this season with standard rootstock and the right variety, or Team Working with What I Have if you're improving an existing tree one habit at a time. If this video showed you what your apple tree has been capable of all along, subscribe to the Amish Life for more forgotten methods, and share this with someone who's been disappointed by their harvest every single fall and never understood why.